Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at chapter 57 of the Quran, Al-Hadid, which translates to the iron.
Sounds pretty, I'm kind of curious to see where this takes us.
Yeah, it's a really interesting chapter, I think. A lot of symbolism packed in there, touching on faith and action. And like you said, iron itself, it blends spiritual and worldly matters together in a way that I think is really fascinating.
Okay, so jumping right into it, the first few verses are pretty striking. It's like you're just dropped right into this vast universe, and everything from the heavens to the earth glorifies Allah. Just sets a powerful scene, right?
Yeah, definitely. Establishes this idea of Allah's knowledge as just all-encompassing. I think verse 4 is a really good example. Paints this picture of him knowing everything, even what's hidden deep in the earth or like what comes down from the sky. You get this sense that like nothing is outside of his awareness. Yeah, that's a pretty intense thought, being constantly seen by this higher power. It makes you think about how you live your life, knowing that everything is witnessed.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely sets a tone of accountability.
Yeah, totally.
And that leads right into, I think, the next section, so verses 7 through 11, where we see these repeated calls to believe in Allah and his messenger. But it's not just believe, it's do something about it.
Right. It's not passive. It's like you have to put your faith into action.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's this big emphasis on spending in his cause. And the chapter describes that as like loaning Allah a loan of goodness. What do you make of that phrasing?
I really like that. It's a powerful metaphor. I think it reframes giving to charity as an investment. Like you're putting good deeds into this cosmic bank that's going to pay dividends in the afterlife. And then what I think is also interesting is that the chapter draws this distinction between people who contribute before conquest and those who contribute after. And it seems to imply that there are different rewards based on when you contributed.
Why do you think that is? What's the significance of making that distinction?
Maybe it's saying that the people who showed faith and generosity when things were hard, like during times of uncertainty, they get recognized for that unwavering commitment.
Okay.
Because it's maybe easier to give charity when things are good, right? But to give when you yourself are struggling, maybe that's when true faith shines through.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we shift gears a little bit and get this really vivid imagery. Verses 12 through 15. Where we see these contrasting descriptions of paradise and hellfire. So we see believers with light radiating from them, and then those who claim to be believers but were hypocrites, they're denied entry, even when they plead to share some of that light. What a powerful contrast, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it really emphasizes the consequences of your actions, and maybe even more so, the state of your heart, right? Like, what are your true intentions? And I think that the imagery of the wall separating paradise and hellfire with that door in it representing mercy on one side and agony on the other, it really underscores that like our choices have consequences.
It makes you think about those hypocrites for a second, right? Like they wanted to be seen as good, but their hearts weren't in it. Makes you wonder, how often do we go through the motions without true conviction? Are we being honest with ourselves about our own beliefs and how we're living them out?
Yeah, that's a tough question to ask yourself, right? Like, am I living in a way that lines up with what I say I believe in? Or am I just performing for other people? I think this chapter is saying that true belief is more than just the outward stuff. It's about sincerity.
Right, and this leads into the idea of remembering Allah and how time impacts our faith. Verse 16, it warns against becoming like those who had scriptures before, but their hearts became hardened over time.
Yeah, it's a reminder that faith, like anything else, it needs to be nurtured. It's like tending a garden. You have to weed out your doubts. You got to water it with your good deeds. You got to give it room to grow. But life can be really distracting, pulling us in all sorts of directions.
Yeah, so how do we stay connected? How do we stay connected to our beliefs and what really matters in the middle of all that noise and chaos? What resonates with you about that?
I think it's about finding those practices that can help us reconnect. So maybe that's prayer or meditation or spending time in nature or even acts of service to others. I think it's about consciously choosing to remember and reaffirm your commitment to what you believe in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of commitment, verses 18 through 21 go deep on the rewards for those who give charitably. And they really get into the nature of worldly life, what we value here, what it is to be alive in this world.
Yeah, there's this beautiful description of paradise. Vast and expansive, like the heavens and the earth. It's promised to those who are generous, who give to others. And that's contrasted with how fleeting all our possessions are, right? All this material stuff we chase after, it fades away like a flower that wilts and dies.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think about how you define success, right? Is it about how much stuff you have? Or is it about something more lasting, contributing to something bigger than yourself?
It's a question that people have been asking for centuries, and I think this chapter is telling us to look beyond just the superficial stuff and focus on what really matters, in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, now we get to verse 25, and this is where things get really interesting to me. We get this very specific mention of iron, like out of nowhere. It feels like a shifting gears. What's the deal with that?
Right, you're going along and all of a sudden it's like, iron what?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think when you step back, it actually ties all these ideas together, all these themes we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm all ears. Connect the dots for me.
Okay. Well, so the chapter points out that iron has this violent force, but it also has benefits for humanity. It's this raw material that's strong and durable, and we get to choose how to use it. Like, we can forge it into tools to build and create, or we can turn it into weapons to destroy. It's like this little microcosm of human potential, showing us we can do great things or really terrible things.
You know what? This focus on iron really struck me. It's like this raw, powerful element, and we get to decide what to do with it. It reminds me of that quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. How do you see this idea of iron playing out in your own life?
It is a powerful analogy. To me, it speaks to our inner strength and the choices that we make each and every day. We have to take responsibility for what we do, and just recognize that even like small decisions, they can have a ripple effect. It all adds up.
I love that. It's like each of us has this inner iron that we can use to shape our own lives and the world around us.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what this chapter is trying to tell us. It's calling us to be mindful, to use our iron intentionally and with wisdom.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. We talked about the vastness of Allah's knowledge, the importance of putting faith into action, the contrast between paradise and hellfire, and this really thought-provoking idea of iron as a symbol of human potential.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
And we can't forget that mention of prophets like Noah, Abraham, and Jesus in verses 26 and 27.
Yeah, a quick mention, but still important.
Even though it's from the Quran, it mentions these figures that you might already know. It shows how these messages, this guidance, it's been woven through history across different beliefs. It's not just like one faith, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on seeing these familiar names pop up here?
I think it emphasizes the universality of these spiritual truths. There are some things that all humans just grapple with and seek answers to. These figures represent that lineage of guidance, like a reminder that Allah's message has been shared with humanity across time.
And that His grace is available to everybody, regardless of background or belief.
Right.
So as we keep going with this deep dive into Al-Hadid, it feels like we're just uncovering layers and layers of meaning and wisdom.
Yeah, we're just getting started. I think this chapter has so much to offer. I'm excited to see what else we discover.
Me too.
It's interesting how this chapter brings together these huge cosmic ideas with these very personal reflections on how we live our lives.
Yeah, it's like you zoom out to see this vast universe, and then you zoom right back in on the choices that we make every single day.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of using our iron wisely, right? Are we making the most of our potential?
Yeah, and it also connects to this other key takeaway from this chapter, the importance of actually living out your beliefs. It's not enough to just say you believe in something. You got to put it into practice.
Right.
Makes me think about those times when I've struggled to actually, live up to my own values. I might believe in compassion and kindness, but then I catch myself being impatient or judgmental with somebody.
Yeah, I think we all have those moments. It's part of being human, right?
Yeah.
We're not perfect.
Right.
The important thing is to not get discouraged, but to keep striving to be better.
Yeah, it's like that idea of loaning Allah a loan of goodness, right? Our actions are kind of like investments in our own spiritual growth.
Exactly, and it's not just about individual growth either. It's about our impact on the world around us.
That's a good point. It's like we all have this responsibility to use our iron to create something positive, something that benefits not just ourselves, but other people too.
And to be mindful of the ways we might be contributing to destruction or negativity, whether it's through our words or actions or even our thoughts.
So it's not just about what we do, but also what we think and say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our inner world shapes our outer reality, so if we're constantly filled with negativity or judgment, that's going to come out in how we interact with people.
Right. It's like that saying, what you focus on expands.
Exactly. So if we want to create a more positive and compassionate world, it starts with cultivating those qualities in ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting how this chapter brings together personal responsibility with this broader sense of being connected to everyone else.
It's like this reminder that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves and that our actions have consequences that extend far beyond just our immediate circle.
Yeah, humbling thought.
But also empowering in a way, right? Because it means that even small acts of kindness or generosity can make a real difference.
And that even if we make mistakes, we can always choose to do better, to learn and grow from those experiences.
Absolutely. And speaking of learning and growth, I think it's worth circling back to that mention of prophets like Noah, Abraham, and Jesus in this chapter.
Yeah, I was hoping we would get back to that. What stood out to you about that section?
Well, I think it's interesting how this chapter from the Quran seamlessly incorporates these figures from other traditions. It suggests this continuity of revelation, a sense that all these prophets were part of this larger tapestry of divine guidance.
It makes me think about the common threads that run through different religions and spiritual paths. Like despite their differences, there's often this shared emphasis on love and compassion and living a life of service to others.
Yeah, I think those are universal values that resonate with something deep within us as humans. And they're certainly reflected in this chapter's call to faith action and using our iron for good.
It feels like we're starting to see this bigger picture emerge here.
We are, and that's the beauty of exploring these texts, There are always new layers to uncover, new insights to glean.
And it's not just about intellectual understanding either. It's about connecting with something deeper within ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about finding inspiration and guidance for how to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
So as we continue our deep dive into Al-Hadid, what are some of the questions or reflections that are coming up for you?
Well, I'm curious to hear from our listeners. How these themes of faith action and the meaning of iron resonate with them? What experiences or insights might they bring to the table?
That's a great question. And what are some of the key takeaways that you hope people will walk away with from this deep dive?
I hope they'll be inspired to think about how they're using their own inner iron, their talents and their resources and their willpower to create a more positive and just world.
And to remember that even small acts of kindness and compassion can have a ripple effect. Contributing to a greater good that extends far beyond just themselves.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference.
It's really amazing how much we've unpacked, how much depth and wisdom we found in just this one chapter.
Yeah.
I love how Al-Hadid, it brings together those big cosmic ideas with really practical guidance on how we're supposed to live.
Yeah, it's like this reminder that spirituality, it's not something that's separate from our day-to-day lives. It's woven into all of our experiences, our choices and our actions, and even how we affect the world.
And speaking of how we affect the world, I keep thinking back to that idea of iron and how it represents all of our potential. It's just such a powerful image.
It is. It really is. And it asks us to think about how we're using our own inner iron. Are we using it to build, or are we using it to tear down? Are we creating, or are we destroying?
That's a good question, and it applies to so many areas of our lives, right? Like our relationships, our work, our communities, even our own thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. It's about recognizing that we have this choice in how we use our strength and our talents and our willpower, and then remembering that those choices, they have consequences, not just for us, but for everyone else around us.
It's a lot of responsibility, but it's also empowering, because it means that we have the ability to shape our own destiny and help to create a better world for everyone.
Yeah, and that even the small things can make a difference, like little acts of kindness and compassion and courage. They can have this ripple effect, They spread out and touch so many people.
I love that image.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how many ways we can use that inner iron of ours to create those ripples. Maybe it's volunteering our time or donating to a good cause, or even just being more aware of how we treat people in our everyday interactions.
Yeah. Or it could be standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Or using our voices to speak out against injustice.
Exactly. Like having the courage to use our iron to fight for a world that actually reflects what we believe in.
And to remember that we're not in this alone. We're part of this huge effort, this global community of people who are all trying to make a difference.
It's inspiring to think about all the good that could happen if we all came together and used our iron for the good of everyone.
It is. It's a reminder that even when things are hard and we face challenges, there's always hope, because each of us has that potential to make things better, to build a brighter future.
Well, that's a beautiful thought to end on. That idea of hope and all that potential within us. I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Al-Hadid.
It's been such a great journey.
I agree. It's been so much fun exploring this chapter and uncovering all this wisdom. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope this deep dive has gotten you thinking about how you're using your own inner iron. How are you shaping the world around you?
Yeah, may we all use our strength and our talents to create a world that's more just and more compassionate and more beautiful for everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep using your iron for good.